Good evening. I'm Andy Yan, and I'm the director of the City program here at Simon Fraser University. And I'd like to welcome you to tonight's presentation, the second annual Larry Bell Urban Forum, Technocity, Equity, Innovation, and the Rush of Smartness. I would like to begin with the acknowledgement that this event is occurring on unceded Indigenous land belonging to the Coast Salish people, including the territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. I'd like to invite Professor Elvin Wiley from the University of British Columbia's Geography Department, who will be tonight's Masters of Ceremonies, to start the event. Thank you.
Thank you so much for being here. I'm Elvin Wiley. I'm a professor in the Department of Geography and chair of the Urban Studies Coordinating Committee at the University of British Columbia. And I'm grateful to all of you for being here. And we're also grateful to have with us Ray Thunderchild to provide a territorial welcome to get us into the spirit of having productive conversations. Ray Thunderchild is an Indigenous actor from Vancouver who has served as MC for National Aboriginal Day at Trout Lake. He was one of the composers who worked on the opening ceremonies for the 2010 Winter Olympics. He's appeared in a wide range of television shows and feature films, including the series Northern Exposure, the action film Pathfinder, the autobiographical feature Tales of an Urban Indian, and Cree for the White Guy, a show introducing people to the Cree culture. So please help me welcome Ray Thunderchild.
Nixi wanga big squanuma. Listaman giwi tamago on the pise. Pues, Eguambito ta, Kaitutaman, can come going. We are capacita of eat workman. Magavina, and an Askama Gota, Musqueam, Squamish, swelling to Twista, a be packed in water get out about a gota, a be topped up water, a baby the way. When Joseph see Hassan, Magavina, Ray Thunderchild, Batsitan. It is proper protocol for people that come from the territory I come from, which is the Plains Cree. An elder like myself introduce himself in the language he was given first. And that's where in Plains Cree was my first language. English is my second language, my borrowed language. I've been here going on 27 years. I want to thank Musqueam, Burrard, Squamish for also welcoming me here, allowing me to be here to share some of the stories that I have, bring them across the mountain to share with them, to come here. This is why I always introduce myself as Munjos. That's my ancestral name. Munjos, that comes from my grandmother. Munjos means a bug. When I say that to people, I always sometimes they chuckle. But you ever take the time to watch a bug? Bug never rests. Bug works till job gets done. Even and then some. But there's also that bug, what we call cancer. My nickname is Ray Thunderchild. I kind of like it. I always like to thank the young chief that I always work with, Chief Ian Campbell. I always hold my hands to that young man. Taught me a lot about his people, and I always taught him a lot about mine also. Both drum makers. Now I've come to that age now where I teach my grandchildren these songs that I sing. This is a song we call a prayer song when we do opening. It comes from the area I come from. It's called the explain the words to you once I'm done, okay, then you'll understand. In the language that I come from, we acknowledge the Creator. The song says, the Creator gave us the righteousness to pray how we feel. This is why I come to sing my way of praying. All my life, I follow this, taking me to the right places. I'm here, aren't I? Hey, hey, thank you.
So I have a few more words to say here. Tonight we're going to be using a lot of fancy words to talk about terabytes of data, adaptive ambient sensors, and QR codes hooked up to the Internet of Things, augmented reality, and maybe a bit of blockchain cryptocurrency crowdfunding schemes that are reshaping life in the so-called smart city. But first I want to tell you a short story about another kind of smart city. Almost every day I walk by Walter Hardwick Avenue in the Olympic Village, named for the UBC professor and city councilor who we can thank for Granville Island, for the brilliant filmmaker and startup entrepreneur Colleen Hardwick, who's with us here tonight, and for the public interest ethos that has made Vancouver famous among the city builders, architects, developers, and planners around the world. Then I head out to the Point Grey campus of the University of British Columbia, where I walk past a series of lighted columns honoring the university's recent fundraising campaign. On one of those columns is the name of Robert S. Wiley, acknowledging the annual Wiley scholarships and bursaries that are now part of a comprehensive array of awards for student achievement that includes the Walter Hardwick undergraduate and doctoral scholarships, and also the Mohinder Singh Dhillon bursary. As soon as I enter the geography building, I walk by the room that was once Professor Hardwick's office, and then I head for the Urban Studies Commons. This is a new student space for the Urban Studies program that Walter Hardwick established in 1971 at the beginning of a decade of dramatic transition for the Vancouver region. In his book, Vancouver, Hardwick praised a generation of students who were mapping a new kind of urbanism. Quote, each in his or her own way has gone on to contribute to urban and regional studies in Canada or abroad, Hardwick wrote. They arrived at different times and remained for different periods, but all left their mark. One student who really left a mark earned a BA in urban geography from UBC and went on to graduate work in California before pursuing a wide-ranging and influential career at the nexus between the public and private sectors in British Columbia. Here's how that path was described in one of many awards. Over a distinguished career, Larry Bell has made an extraordinary contribution to British Columbia. He has advised and participated in the creation of public policy and the reshaping of government. He has provided strong leadership to service organizations and critical public institutions, and he has contributed to his province as a volunteer. That award was the Order of British Columbia. Beyond the many contributions of his professional career, chair and CEO of BC Hydro, member and chair of UBC's Board of Governors, chair of the Canada Line projects, and many other senior management and service positions, Mr. Bell has also demonstrated leadership, vision, and generosity on the board of the Vancouver Hospital Foundation, the Board of Trustees of the BC Transplant Society, and general campaign chair for the United Way of the Lower Mainland. He was honored as one of the patrons of Science World for contributions of energy, wisdom, time, financial resources, and goodwill. In public service, Mr. Bell served as Deputy Minister of Finance, Secretary to the Treasury Board, Deputy Minister of Housing, Lands and Parks, and Deputy Minister responsible for transit of the province of British Columbia. His role as chair of the Canada Line helped to shape a lasting regional legacy of efficiency and sustainable transport that has become known worldwide, winning the Gold Award for Infrastructure from the Canadian Council for Public-Private Partnerships. Mr. Bell's work on this globally recognized project that was one of the largest infrastructure projects ever undertaken in the province of BC amidst the region's warm-up for the 2010 Olympic and Paralympic Winter Games is a perfect illustration of how each generation's students become the city builders and city shapers for the next generation in an urbanizing world. So this is the real smart city, despite the technologies that we're going to talk a lot about tonight. It's the parts of the cities that shape our everyday experience, and it's the programs and institutions that support the next generation. So when I arrive each day to the Urban Studies Commons, I quickly fall into conversation with our undergraduates in our Urban Studies minor, newly expanded under the leadership of our department head, Marwan Hassan. And I get to work with undergraduate, master's, and doctoral students who are working on various elements of what we're calling the Larry Bell Cities Project. Each year, we support a dozen graduate-level Bell Urban Research Awards that enable early career field research here in Vancouver and in cities around the world, focusing on urban geography and policy choices. We bring distinguished visitors to Vancouver, like Jenny Robinson from University College London, Eric Shepard and Helga Leitner from UCLA, and Matt Wilson by way of the University of Kentucky and Harvard, and Gillian Rose from Oxford. And next month, Anita F. Hill from Brandeis. And then next month, Chris Gibson from the University of Wollongong. We've also joined with Penny Gerstein in the School of Community and Regional Planning in preliminary discussions with our colleagues at the University of Washington in Seattle on an open data portal as part of the Microsoft-supported Cascadia Urban Analytics Cooperative. Each year, we also partner with Simon Fraser University's Cities program for events like this evening, where we bring academics and policy professionals together to explore some of the most urgent and fascinating questions of theory and policy in the urban age. And we're allowed to do this through the extraordinary help and support of Frank Pacella, and also Craig Jones has helped to organize this event, and we're very grateful for every aspect of their help. Last year, the first Larry Bell Urban Forum was mapping the hedge city and brought together local and international scholars studying how Vancouver has joined a planetary network of cities that have become attractive, safe places to store the accumulated capital, accumulated wealth in real estate to insure against the dangers of an uncertain future. That event was a crucial part of regional and provincial policy debates that continue, as illustrated by the continued work on this topic by some of the experts on that panel and some of the experts who are in this room, including Andy Yan himself with his memorable quotes in The Sun in just a few days ago, talking about taxation changes, kind of like increasing the parking fees for capital, if you will. And also thanks to the YouTube API, we can also map how some of the, if we look at the recommended videos on the video of last year's event, the API, the application programming interface, allows us to analyze how that conversation has been woven into national and transnational discussions of all sorts in cities around the world, from talks by the planners Larry Beasley, James Kunstler, and Peter Calthorpe, guides on travel and real estate investments of various kinds, TED Talks on the future of globalization, education and urban planning, the complexity of emergent systems, and next-generation urban transportation technologies. So that brings us to this year's Bell Urban Forum, to explore the variety, the veracity, and the velocity of big data and the accelerating next-generation technological possibilities and challenges in the smart city movement. So all of this is possible made possible by the vision and generosity of Larry Bell. So please join me in thanking Mr. Bell for this generational achievement, the true smart city. Where is Mr. Bell? Thank you. So now it is my privilege to, I'm actually not really the master of ceremonies. I'm going to turn it over to people who are far more intelligent than I am, colleagues who are exponentially smarter than I am, although I am urbanite, beginning with Dr. Matthew Wilson, who is with UBC this semester as the Larry Bell Distinguished Visiting Scholar. Dr. Wilson is Associate Professor of Geography at the University of Kentucky, and he is Visiting Scholar at Harvard's Center for Geographic Analysis. His current research analyzes the history, present, and future of digital mapping practices, and his most recent book is New Lines, Critical GIS and the Trouble of the Map, published by Walter Hardwick's alma mater, the University of Minnesota Press. It's all tied together nicely here. This term, Professor Wilson is teaching a graduate seminar, Spatial and Cartographic Techniques, with a special focus on cartographic attention, the anxieties and opportunities of an attention economy in an age of acceleration in location-aware services, geosocial media, and digital geospatial intelligence. And tonight, Dr. Wilson will help us explore the fascinating opportunities and challenges of smart cities, this expanding variety, veracity, and velocity of big data in the reconstruction of urban policy and urban theory. So let's welcome our guide to Technocity, Matthew Wilson.
Okay. Thanks for this rich and sort of thick welcome. I really appreciate all the words that have been said, the songs sung. Indeed, we are all so fortunate for the many gifts that are given to allow us to be in these spaces and times. So I wanted to sort of open up again, provide more openings, for this sort of event to think through what it means to engage in something that we're hearing so frequently about, the smart city, smart objects, smart technologies, many of which we probably carry on our person even tonight, that's hoovering up information in stasis. And I think this event hopefully will transition us into sort of thinking a bit more about our own responsibilities and responsiveness in this particular moment. So I don't know if I should put a different background. I actually don't have any slides. Per se, this one's nice. Let's go back to the... Thanks for this, Elvin. All right. Here we are. So across our planet, city managers are turning towards sensors and algorithmic technologies to mitigate and curtail social and environmental risk, to produce efficiencies, security, and economic potential in the everyday. In just a month, the cities of Vancouver and Surrey will join the Canada Smart Cities Challenge, a competition for up to $50 million to use, quote, data and connected technology to produce meaningful outcomes for residents, end quote. So in this Larry Bell Urban Forum, we have an opportunity to discuss this competition and general calls for urban innovation, understanding that what each of us think in terms of meaningfulness might, productively hopefully, differ. So the participants that we've assembled on this panel tonight represent a range of interests, more immediate intervening efforts, and long-standing strategizing and thinking. Some will, of course, have more specific knowledge of efforts already underway in Vancouver and Surrey, while others will have more general perspectives to offer. I guess my overarching logic of this gathering is to help provide an address to general questions. What kind of smart city? Smart city for whom? And with specific thought to the incredible uniqueness of Vancouver's and Surrey's positions in this more recent opportunity for investment in urban technology. So as such, tonight is organized into two different parts. First, we'll hear from Jesse Adcock and Sean Simpson with the cities of Vancouver and Surrey, respectively, followed by a wider facilitated conversation with our distinguished panel, partially responding to the challenges and opportunities of the Canada Smart City competition, to think more generally about the rush of smartness with you, hopefully, our audience. So in my most recent book that Elvin so thankfully plugged, I'm trying to explore what I consider the various troubles of the map, both the specific problems that maps are called upon to address and the problems that maps directly or indirectly enable. Trouble is risky, trouble is rewarding. It's both sometimes pain and pleasure. And here I attempt to follow Donna Haraway, not to resolve our troubles, but to stay with it, to wallow in all the messes that trouble makes. The smart city and the rush of smartness is our challenge, I think, to sort of think through these kinds of troubles, I might suggest. And in some sense, their logics are already here and now, and our challenge is how to make this renewed mandate for smartness more responsive and more responsible. Indeed, these troubles are an opportunity to rethink the human, as one of our panelists, Professor Gillian Rose, has prompted. In the digitally mediated city, she suggests what it means to be human is challenged, and as new digital technologies intervene in attention and memory, the production of care and connection, and the experiential perspectives of space and time. And so here, perhaps we might highlight our very peculiar title. Some pronounce it Technocity, maybe it's Technocity. Here, we are, of course, being a little too clever. Technocity is our attempt within a genre that attempts to laminate techno onto a variety of things: music, art, science, and even the city. However, Technocity is also a slippage from Technicity, long a concept in continental philosophy in the last century, from Martin Heidegger to Gilbert Simondon to Catherine Malabou and Bernard Stiegler. And as James Ash has reviewed, quote, Technicity can be understood in three key ways: as a persuasive logic for thinking about the world, as a mode of existence of technical objects, or as an originary condition for human life itself. It's this last conceptualization of technicity from Stiegler, that it's an originary condition for human life, that I think is the most ponderous for me. To experience space, such as the space of this room, or the space of the city in which this building is located, or in which it locates us, is in some sense to fixate on time. Stiegler argues that technologies have long given humans a sense of the present, a relation to memories long past, and an orientation to futures not yet arrived. Technologies grant us some capacity to act, and some range of motion in which to actualize. And so here he is not limiting his philosophy to digital technologies, but to the multiple forms of apparatus that continue to constitute our shared humanity. Of course, I'm biased, but I would propose that geographers have long been interested in this kind of technicity as that which conditions human life, whether it is an interest in human environmental relations or urban and economic, social and cultural, political and physical domains of inquiry. Indeed, from my partial perspective, I consider the mapping, and map making as having precisely this kind of technicity, as underlying the conditions for human life itself. You see, maps enable a kind of quandary. The lines we draw upon the map, in turn, often draw us in. The neat lines on our mobile maps and the glowing blue orb on our mobile device that tells us you are here are not only informative. These kinds of markings are also suggestive, prompting us in this or that way. I often think these kinds of moments of the map as a question of habit, of consciousness itself and the actions, inactions, practices, and thought that saturate all the moments of everyday life. Maps as objects with technicity enable habits, causing us to move, to be moved, to attend, to care. However, there are new lines, new maps, new objects of technicity in our midst. And I tend to conceptualize them as quantified self-citynation, as a general theory for the technoscientific solutions that we often offer to confront socio-technical problems. So as a geographer at the intersection of critical social theory and geographic information science, I'm interested in the technologies of geographic representation. More than GIS, I take up the conceptual drift of the map as one such technology of representation, and I burden the map with the weight of some important socio-technical changes. You can imagine my students get a bit overwhelmed by this at times. But I tend to think of the map as an artifact of the times and spaces of map use, rather than a clarified vision of reality. Thought in this way, the map is already an externalization of human culture, of human memory, and action. I think the point is to thicken our understanding of these basic objects, to think of them as more than a tool, more than a static object. I would suggest then that this shift in thinking, this thickening of objects with technicity, can be applied to a variety of technoscientific solutions to socio-technical problems, and we'll likely hear a number of those tonight. So following, again, Stiegler, these digital technologies are our kind of pharmaca, both our poison and our most urgent cure. These pharmaca reflect not only the reality we hope to understand and change, but also the techniques for thinking about life itself. And as such, these kinds of technologies are retentional techniques. They constitute both to what we pay attention and how we pay attention. Digital technologies have the ability to draw our eye, to condition about what we care, how we might be convicted, how we might act. Attention is care, and there is much to care about and much that continues to distract us. I can say that as an American citizen living abroad. In my book, then, I construct a concept of quantified self-city nation in order to examine the specific technologies of representation to consider their technocultural conditions and their ramifications. New devices, new techniques have emerged to better quantify an individual's movement, stasis, and even our sleep. Many of us probably have similar kinds of apps on our phones whose subtle devices are constantly measuring habits of our body and habits of our general movements about the city. A discourse about the smart city, I think, applies these principles of measurement and quantification to the analysis, representation, and management of the city. The rapid pace of everyday life alongside increased individual access to digital technologies in advanced capitalist society has meant, at least for some, a broadened capacity to acknowledge, to represent, and to measure the movements and the habits of society. Perhaps, indeed, a new quantitative revolution is upon us, as another one of our panelists, Professor Elvin Wiley, has proposed, and along with it, an evolved political economy that puts a premium on the digital dossiers of our masses in service of an agenda of efficiency, advertising, and marketing. Cities are frequently invoked in these calculations, rethought often as organisms, in the same moment that human bodies are often quantified as systems. As such, the interactive opportunities and limitations for engagement, representation, and resistance are ever more important. I frequently think that the parallels between our rising consumer electronics sector that gives us things like personal activity monitors, Fitbits, and smartwatches are often thought of at the same time within the rapid visioning and speculation around smart cities. To be clear, I think, a totalizing rejection of the force of quantification is far too hasty. We've moved on. We've graduated, I think, from those moments. In her discussion of radio frequency identification, RFIDs, another geographer, Louisa Moore, highlights this pharmacological moment. She writes, quote, "The capacity of RFID to make us locatable is acutely ambivalent. We feel its potential to watch and to incarcerate, just as we simultaneously feel it fulfill some of our desires and pleasures," end quote. So I read Stiegler as suggesting that this ambivalence between incarcerating surveillance and voyeuristic pleasure is productive. Only when the extremes of these dualities become toxic is another relation urgently necessary. And so here I'd like to quote Shannon Mattern, who unfortunately is not able to join us tonight. In her essay called "A City is Not a Computer," I want to quote her a bit at length here. Quote, "We don't know how these urban experiments will fare. Since they are in a constant state of development, always versioning toward an optimized model, ever on the horizon, they are not easily evaluated or critiqued. But if you believe the marketing hype, though, we're on the cusp of an urban future in which embedded sensors, ubiquitous cameras and beacons, networked smartphones, and the operating systems that link them all together will produce unprecedented efficiency, connectivity, and social harmony. We're transforming the idealized topology of the open web and the Internet of Things into urban form. So our current paradigm, the city as computer, appeals because it frames the messiness of urban life as programmable and subject to rational order," end quote. I propose quantified self-city nation as a peculiar trouble that we must stay with. To invoke this as a concept is to conceptualize how certain solutions are always in search of particular problems, and how this myopia and inability to think outside quantification can introduce some curious technocultures. Quantified self-city nation signals a system of attentional control across scales, where the organization of an individual body, its movement, its stasis, becomes the resource for the organization of bodies, both human and more than human. In other words, quantification is not just about counting and calculation and systems of empiricism, but it's about leveraging a discourse of predeterminacy, preemption, and a tilting toward a future that has not yet arrived. Digital devices that map the movements of a self become metaphors and figures to upscale these techniques for neighborhoods, for cities, for regions, and nations. And as these technologies achieve greater ubiquity, their ability to have both greater resolution and personalization widens. I think with this comes a new register of problems that can be solved through greater measurements and adjustments of systems. And it is the way in which these techniques slip across scales that I think continues to pique our interest and should register our attention. So how and to what might a body attend in the Technocity? How and to what might a city pay attention? How and to what might a nation come to care? What are the possibilities for intervention, refocus, or to change the channel even? What are the unique challenges of this Technocity and all the dispossessions and speculations that mingle on the street, at the beach, on the waters, and in the nearby mountains? How might this rush of smartness, this Technocity, champion both greater equity and the creative forces of innovation? So thanks for that. So again, tonight is organized into two parts. We'll next hear from Jesse and Sean on the challenges and opportunities of the Canada Smart City competition. We'll then take a short break where I'll invite you to enjoy some refreshments, and then we'll have a more interactive second half of the evening with our panel. So please join me in welcoming Jesse Adcock and Sean Simpson to the podium. Jesse is Chief Technology Officer for the City of Vancouver, and Sean Simpson is Information Technology Director for the City of Surrey. All right, thank you very much.
Perfect. So thank you for having us. This is actually such a great opportunity, and I'm not sure if you can see me. You needed like a bit of a box. What an interesting time for cities. What an interesting time for communities. What an interesting time for people, for students, for innovators, for businesses. Human ingenuity is taking over based on all of the new technologies that are available for us that we have not connected yet in several ways. And so the opportunity and the potential is limitless. And I think that the innovation that's taking rise is interestingly finding its way into our lives as smart city use cases as one of its first incarnations, because people are oftentimes, when they innovate, I think they take a look at these technologies and they try to look at how they can improve their lives and how they can improve their communities. And so part of the momentum behind the smart cities movement is that there is a significant critical mass of innovation happening in that space. A lot of the early thoughts that come to mind with respect to the deployment of sensors and the use of data and analytics is very much applicable in the day-to-day running of communities and cities. So it's transforming cities in a way that we've never seen before. Cities have been transformed by other types of innovation and the advent of other technologies, but the difference now is the cadence of change and the pace, as well as the ability for our populations in all parts of the world to absorb that change. Technology and the use of technology is now not limited anymore. It's ubiquitous. So not only is the sensors and the data is ubiquitous, but our kids, are born into a day and age where by the age of 16, 17, 18 months, they're able to navigate technologies that many of us in this room have only learned in the last 2 decades. And so that really changes the DNA and the fabric of how we think and move forward. So I have 6 nieces and nephews, and I have a mom, and they range from 2 months old to the oldest being 13. And it's been probably what has significantly propelled my career in the last decade, just watching these kids and how they behave, and that opening up a whole world of thinking to me, because it's completely different than how I learned and how many of us that run cities today have learned. So this redefinition of our community is creating all sorts of new conundrums. There's the question of how to adapt to the technology. There's the privacy and security considerations. There's how to connect it. There's how to play a new role in the innovation ecosystem, how to plan for this technology, how to think ahead. We've typically thought of our infrastructure as being very physical, but how do we now plan for a future where physical and cyber converge? How do we retrofit the physical infrastructure? How do we try and find the money to pay for all of this? How do we do it in change cycles that are significantly faster than the change cycles that we've traditionally sort of witnessed in typical bureaucratic environments? And so cities have responded in different ways. And what you'll see now, I think, across the globe is a spectrum. So had we had this conversation about 4 or 5 years ago, and anybody who's heard me talk about this before will have heard this, but 4 or 5 years ago, cities were sort of just getting sort of looped into this notion of smart cities. And the label of smart cities will come and go. We'll call it something new, but really the category of change is all about responding to the changing world around us. And that changing world around us now is being driven by technological change. And so 5 years ago, cities were starting to just sort of deal with this. Now what we see is there's a spectrum. There's cities that have been dealing with this from a strategic and policy viewpoint for several years, and there are cities that are just still coming on board with that perspective. And so our cities of Vancouver and Surrey have been on this journey now for a while. So we're going to talk to you a little bit about how we have tried to organize ourselves to adopt the technology, to deploy the technology, to make sensible decisions, how to plan for it, how to fund it, how to think outside the box with it, how to respond to these sort of new questions and queries. So at the City of Vancouver, our journey sort of started in 2012 in terms of a formal strategic approach to dealing with technology and technological change. And at that time, what we were sort of witnessing across the city was just that there was a number of different types of projects and programs and thoughts emerging. And so the city at that time put together a 4-year digital strategy, which was all really around the foundational elements of how do we now start to build a new organizational structure to manage this change and to coordinate to the best of our abilities the work that's across the city. Digital and technology is very much a horizontal across verticals, and anybody who's worked in a city or worked with cities will know that they are sort of siloed verticals that don't oftentimes coordinate activities. We try to get better as we go, but these are bureaucracies by design. And so, technology is an opportunity to try and do a little bit of silo busting there. So there was a 4-pillar digital strategy that sort of created the framework within which we've been operating as we move forward, and I'm going to talk to you a little bit about that in a second. We completed the bulk of our digital strategy in 2015, 2016, and at that stage, what we found was our work wasn't done. So while our strategy was complete, the world had changed. So when we first started this, we were talking about citizen services and open data, and we were talking about big data. And then somewhere along the line, we're talking about quantum computing, and we're talking about sensors being ubiquitous, and we're talking about drone technology, and we're talking about autonomous vehicles. And so the goalpost shifted on us. And then what we realized essentially was that we needed to do a more significant transformation on how we manage technology to be able to create a faster clip at which we could deliver change. And so the years of 2017 and 2018, from a technology standpoint, have all been about getting reorganized inside the organization so that we can maximize our efforts. And the view really is that now that positions us to get to that next level where we can try to fathom a world of interoperability. And the reason I say fathom a world of interoperability is because there are so many moving parts. The actual notion of everything being interoperable and connected is very, very difficult, especially in the context of, again, a bureaucracy. So just sort of in conclusion, the 4 pillars that have guided us through all of this have been engagement and access, and trying to employ digital tools or digital means or channels in a way that allows the city to be present in mediums where it hasn't traditionally been. And so enhancing that interaction with citizens. The next pillar was around digital infrastructure and assets, and this is really the body of work dedicated to creating that future digital infrastructure through robust partnerships. Cities aren't always, especially Canadian cities, aren't always taking advantage of P3 opportunities as much as our neighbors down south that have a little bit more flexibility with that kind of stuff. And what we realize very much is that the future infrastructure that we need to run our cities, it is sort of very difficult to fund that within the current instruments that we have for funding. And so we really needed to start to get creative around how do we now come up with plans to create that infrastructure. And by that I mean data, I mean fiber optic networks, I mean Wi-Fi. And so then the digital economy was the 3rd pillar. The Vancouver ecosystem is growing, And there's been a huge role for the city to play within that ecosystem that it may not have traditionally played. And then finally, organizational maturity, just making sure that the organization from within is also transforming as the staff within the city looks to evolve to a new paradigm. So I'm going to pass it over to Sean to talk to us a little bit about Surrey's journey.
Thank you, Jesse. So I'm from Vancouver. I grew up in Vancouver it wasn't until I finished school at UBC that I got a job, went out to Surrey, and I knew nothing about Surrey. So I'm going to presume that maybe you don't know anything about Surrey either, so I might take a moment about what drives us. So some of the unique characteristics about Surrey is that geographically, we're huge. We have the same size geographically as Vancouver, Burnaby, and Richmond combined. Could all fit inside. So that drives a lot of what we do. We have 1,000 residents moving to our city a month. With that type of increase in demand on our services, that also drives what we do. We have a third of our population is under 20. That's unlike anywhere else in Canada. We receive the most landed immigrants. We have a lot of these unique characteristics. We're building schools, we're developing land. So this informs a lot of our decisions. But in the backdrop of that, we had 10 years of this massive growth and no tax increases. And consequently, we really have to be lean and leveraging innovation. And that really led us to a point where we said, okay, what are we doing that is innovative across the organization? As Jesse said, we really do have some different silos. The great thing about working in a city is you have lawyers, you have electricians, you have every type of business is inside the city. And it's about finding where we are collaborating and showcasing where we are providing leadership and innovation. So with that innovation background, we did create this Smart Surrey strategy back in 2014, and it's similar to what Jesse characterized, so I'm not going to go through it in detail, but we too have 4 pillars, everything from service delivery, which talks about modernizing our services, and a lot of that is driven by the change from outside. And I have a daughter, a teenage daughter, and that phone never leaves her hand. And I don't know if you have kids, but that's the reality. And the reality is that she's never going to expect to come to City Hall to interact with us. That sounds absurd to her. So her expectation is to interact with us digitally. That informs a lot of her reality. We have engagement in digital inclusion and facilitating economic growth and sustainable infrastructure. Instead of kind of going through some of those, I thought I'd make sure just a bit of a story. So we set about modernizing our services, and part of the backdrop of that was, let me go back a bit further. We have PCs, we have phones, and when we get rid of them, we want to give them out meaningfully. So we partnered with our planning department, and the planning department have these community connections like United Way and other organizations that know who would best benefit from these PCs. We wipe them and recycle them, and they knew how to give them out. And so they were giving out all of our equipment, and we thought that's great. And then we used a little bit of GIS to figure out, are we giving them out to the people in need, so we can see where we're giving them, we can see where the greatest need is using Stats Canada, et cetera. And in the we found out, oh great, they are going to communities of need. And then we realized, is that the objective? It's measurable? Yes. Is that an improvement in the community? Sure. But what we also found was that the people that receive them might not necessarily know how to use them. So of course we have to find partners in the community that provide these types of services. And libraries always provide this type of service where they're teaching people how to use computers for free, and they also teach them how to write resumes, they teach them how to go online and access services and apply for grants online. And so that helped broaden the scope of this project. And we found that was quite successful. And then that aligned back with our service delivery. How do we connect the services we're doing with the people that are most in need? And so we found partnerships with other Vancouver groups like BC 2-in-1, which leverages open data from multiple sources where you can go online and you can see where shelters are open, how many beds are open in real time. And so it's about all this journey from the PC all the way to actually making an impact in the community with people that really need those services. So that's kind of the community side of things. And another one that when people ask me, what's a smart city? And if my kids ask me, and they only have a 2-second attention span, I'll say, see those garbage cans out there on the street? We used to drive around in the city and and go pick up garbage cans, whether they were overflowing in a park or whether they were empty. And we just drove around in a schedule, picking them up. And that's not very efficient. So we bought this new technology, these new bins. They're called Big Belly. And these bins have solar panels on top. And they store the energy and they crush the garbage, they compact it. And that's great. But then they actually notify us when they're full. And using GIS and routing, and it's a more efficient means of picking up garbage. Now, of course, it reduces CO2, and the environmental impact is less, but also the sense of community is greater. I don't know how you feel about when you're going to parks and you're walking around, there's garbage everywhere, the whole broken window type scenario. It does have a community impact. So there's kind of two types of things, everything from the infrastructure to services, et cetera. So I'm going to now shift to the journey that we are on with the City of Vancouver, and we're very excited about it. So I'm going to explain a bit more about what this whole journey is about. So you've heard about some of the journey that Jesse shared. We both have, we're two leading cities in this regard. We could both learn from each other. We're very much stronger together. And we share so many common problems and common opportunities. And so beginning last summer, we started to have this dialogue about what are some of those commonalities? How could we partner? And how could we even create a working relationship and a governance model for these two cities to come together in an unprecedented model? All level, from council all the way down to analysts. So what we came up with, we think is leverageable across other municipalities across Canada. And I wanted to share with you a video, kind of what we kicked off last summer.
Imagine shaping a city where technology and innovation meet to serve people. A city that is inclusive and safe, mobile and green, healthy and thriving with opportunities. This is a smart city, your smart city. This is your chance. Contribute your ideas to the Smart Cities Challenge as the cities of Surrey and Vancouver team up with a joint bid toward a $50 million prize. Come join the challenge. Share your smart idea. smartertogether.ca.
So creating that video was a lot easier than creating this MOU. It's a nice video. So this Memorandum of Understanding really is outlines how we come together, how we're going to make decisions, how we will procure, how we will partner with other vendors, how do we invite other people in, other stakeholders into this conversation, how do we reach out to the community and help involve them in this process. And so to restate a few things that were said earlier about the Smart City Challenge, is a federal challenge, and really the aim of it is to have meaningful outcomes in the community that are measurable, outcomes that can be applied across Canada, no matter what size city it is. We are larger cities, and we're in the top category of 500,000 population and above. And the solutions that we come up to tackle these problems, they need to be leveraging data and connected technology, of course. That's kind of one of the foundations. But no matter what we come up with, we need to reach out and involve many different stakeholder groups. Indigenous groups, we have to involve community groups, academia, the vendor community, other municipalities that have chosen not to participate. We have an NDA for them to sign. And so we want to bring them in to help validate that what we go forward with resonates in their communities, and that makes our bid much stronger. So the process of this journey starts back in the summer when we started to talk about it. We arrived at the MOU, and that coincided with last fall when the government released the application guidelines. And from there, we had a better understanding of what we were actually trying to achieve. We have to submit April 24th, and we're going to be submitting a joint bid in the top category for $50 million. In the summer, we will find out if we were shortlisted. We feel confident that we have a great chance because we really have something that's unique across Canada. We haven't seen other cities that are working towards what we have already achieved. And no matter what the outcome of what we say we're successful or not in the bid, we have already achieved something that we know that we can be leveraged going forward. That MOU, that site that you saw, smartertogether.ca, is a call for ideas. We're going to be able to leverage that going forward. So we're already very happy about what we've achieved. But next summer, we'll find out if we're shortlisted. If we're shortlisted, we receive $250,000 to put together the real bid, which is due next winter. And then the finalist, or the winner, would be announced spring of 2019. So that's the timeline we're working towards. And we have multiple streams in how we're working through this process. They're not parallel, so they're running in parallel at any given time. And starting with last summer, we did reach out in both the City of Vancouver and Surrey. We created websites and surveys to solicit what the community might think we should do. And we did this before we even knew what the government was going to organize into. And they've organized into different focus areas, including mobility and empowerment and inclusion, and a few others. So during that process where we went out, we also had the governance stream where we created that MOU. We also had joint working groups where we put together a lot of the different managers and thought leaders from our two organizations together. This has never happened. We had a room full of 50 managers from every area of the city working together on trying to identify what are those common challenges and opportunities. We have advisory streams where we're looking, as I said, to invite other municipalities and organizations to help inform what we're doing and validate. And of course, we have a strong need to lean on the vendor community and business partners to actually provide solutions that drive towards the ultimate goals of the project. So we're very excited about this whole journey. We very much encourage you to participate in this. At smartertogether.ca, there's an open call for innovation where you can submit your ideas. To date, we've already received 200 plus ideas from the public, and those will be, we're already going through them iteratively, so we really encourage all of your thoughts. We're going to be providing more direction and focus shortly, and so you'll have a clear understanding of what we're trying to achieve, and we encourage you to participate in that. So, with that, thank you.